In case you didn't know, this right here next to me is Super Sonic, Sonic's transformation when he gets all 7 Chaos Emeralds. This form has been a staple in the series since Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It's clearly an original form Sega made up and has no outside influence whatsoever. This power is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card when Sonic goes up against his adversaries, typically during the climax of games, and the power of Super Sonic allows him to save the world, and even the universe, or time itself. Of course, if you're a fan of the franchise, you would know that other characters can also harness this power, for example, Shadow, or even Silver the Hedgehog. When you think about additional super forms, you have to ask yourself which characters can actually go super, and I feel like there's a lot of discrepancy amongst fans. Let me explain. So I made a video recently called 13 Facts About Sonic That You Do Not Know, and in the video, I said this. It's generally understood that the rule in the Sonic franchise is that only male hedgehogs have a super form, at least as far as the actual canon of the series goes. As part of the course for creating content on the internet, of course, there's going to be contrarians in the comments, and honestly, I think it's actually for good reason, because I feel like it's never been truly clear as to who exactly can go super in the series, considering the fact that things change a lot, especially when you consider Sega sometimes flip-flopping on positions that they have. Does Amy Rose have a canonical super form? How about Knuckles the Echidna? What about Tails? In some Sonic games, he does possess that ability, and they even have a Funko Pop of Super Tails. So, what exactly are we to believe? There's so much conflicting messaging out there. Well, subscribe to the channel with all notifications and allow me to explain to the best of my ability. So, to start off, let's talk about the statement, only male hedgehogs can go super. Did I make this up? Where exactly did I pull this from? This is Ian Flynn, a longtime writer for the Sonic the Hedgehog comic books, and recently has transitioned over to writing the actual video games. I believe he also serves on the lore council for Sonic. This right here is a post from him in 2015, and somebody asked him, is it true that Sega has restricted the super form to only male hedgehogs? To which he said, it seems to be the case for now. More recently, somebody asked and said, does Sega restrict other characters from transforming into super aside from Sonic and Shadow? To which Ian replied and said, yes, the official word is only male hedgehogs, and this again was in 2020. And this isn't the only time that Ian has commented on the matter as to whether or not who can go super, and considering the fact that he works within the scope of limitations that Sega sets, I kind of do take his word for it, so let's take a look at this podcast clip.
Is the ancient prophecies seen in Hidden Palace Zone part of the reason that only male hedgehogs can go super? Is there any old story behind the creation of that prophecy that remains to be?
The whole male exclusive super thing is unsavory, and I'm hoping that might get, if not repealed, then adjusted down the line.
So now that we have official statements by somebody who has some degree of authority on this subject, now the burden of proof is on the other side to prove these claims. So let's go through every single example of characters going super in the franchise, and then from there see if this statement, only male hedgehogs can go super, holds up under any scrutiny. So, Super Amy over here is definitely an interesting case. The first time that Amy Rose has ever received a super form is in Sonic Origins Plus, which released in 2023. And the second time she ever went super in the franchise was in Sonic Superstars. So in Origins and Superstars, she has this ability. But I think in terms of the canon for the story, I think this can only be chalked up as gameplay, which is separate from the canon. In Sonic Superstars, there are 2 instances where canonically, as far as the story goes, the 7 Chaos Emeralds are used for some type of transformation. The first instance is when Trip gets all 7 Chaos Emeralds and transforms into her dragon form, which, by the way, we will talk about later on in the video, and when Super Sonic fights the dragon boss at the end of the game. So Super Amy never actually appears in Sonic Superstars. This is exclusive gameplay mechanics. Also, you'll notice that her form doesn't really alter her appearance like Super Sonic's does or any of the other super forms that have been canon to the series. Sonic Origins Plus is even easier to debunk. The only game where Amy canonically appears is Sonic CD. So right off the bat, you can cross off Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and Sonic 3. And then if you look at Sonic CD, which is her only canon appearance in Sonic Origins, the Chaos Emeralds aren't even available in this game, so no Chaos Emeralds. And technically the story is about Sonic saving Amy, which is acknowledged in further games that are canon like Sonic Adventure. So Super Amy has been ruled out. Her super form is strictly a gameplay mechanic or a reward for the player. So, Super Tails and Super Knuckles. There's a lot of arguments that are similar to the ones we use against Amy Rose, but it does get a little more complicated with these two. As far as Super Tails goes, Sonic 1, no Chaos Emeralds and also no Tails. Sonic 2, the canon ending is right here with Super Sonic flying next to Tails on the tornado. not Tails going super. The opening cutscene of Sonic 3 also demonstrates the true canon ending of Sonic 2 because Sonic has the emeralds and goes super right in the beginning of this game. As far as Sonic 3's story goes, we also know that Super Sonic is the only one that has the access to the Doomsday Zone, which is the true final ending of Sonic 3. No Tails, no Knuckles. Basically, the same reason you could rule out Tails being super in the classic games is the same reason you could rule out Knuckles going super in the classic games. Yes, in terms of gameplay, if you collect 7 Chaos Emeralds, you can use this ability when you are using them as playable characters in the campaigns. However, as demonstrated by the cutscene and future dialogue in Sonic games, clearly these are not the canon endings. These are once again just gameplay rewards for players. Also, when characters like Super Sonic, Super Silver, or Super Shadow transform, they turn golden and their eyes turn red. In the classic games, when you have Knuckles, Tails, and Amy go super, there really is no alteration to their appearances. Also, for example, in Sonic Origins, when you collect all the emeralds, a character like Amy, it doesn't say that she has a super form. But we do have one instance in the actual storytelling of Sonic games where these two, you could argue, do go super. And that, of course, is Sonic Heroes. At the end of Sonic Heroes, when you fight Neo Metal Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles put their hands together and then they use the Chaos Emeralds to transform. But you'll notice that Sonic is the one that actually transforms, and the other two kind of look confused, like they have no idea what's going on. Their appearances don't alter, and they're kind of like stuck in these bubbles. So to me, what I interpret this as is Super Sonic using his power as some type of like extension to have Tails and Knuckles help him. They would never be able to access the Chaos Emerald's power by themselves. Sonic is clearly extending his abilities over to them, and it's like he's carrying them as opposed to them doing this organically by themselves. So I will admit this is probably the most iffy, and if you really wanted to push back, this could probably be a good example of the counter argument, but due to the fact that Ian years later is talking about these mandates, I would assume that what I theorized earlier is probably the correct case. There is also one line of dialogue in Sonic Frontiers where Knuckles talks to Sonic and says that if he went Super Knuckles, it would have been over faster, and I personally interpret this as sarcasm or satire. I don't think he actually means going Super Knuckles. So Super Tails and Super Knuckles, I think there is kind of like that gray area. It could be controversial. If you headcanon that they have super forms, I think that's totally valid, but that is my explanation for what I think Sega's mindset is. By the way, the same explanation for Knuckles, Tails, and Amy's super forms just being gameplay mechanics, it also applies to Mighty and Ray as well. Especially because the only character that fights the Egg Rivieri is Super Sonic, so that is clearly the canon ending. Super Ray and Super Mighty are not. Burning Blaze is another argument that I've seen, and it's also a very interesting one at that, because she does technically have a form that she transforms into, which is very similar to Super Sonic. Sonic Rush is also 100% canon, so you could almost have an argument there, but where I would push back and why I think Sega's statement still holds up is that Burning Blaze is not a super form, it's her burning form, I guess you could say. Burning Blaze accesses this form by transforming using the Soul Emeralds, which I believe she's the only one that has the ability to use to access a burning form. It's not clear as to whether or not Sonic can do this. And then if you look at Super Sonic, or any super form for that matter, they are achieved through using the Chaos Emeralds. The Soul Emeralds and Chaos Emeralds are two different sets of gems. While they're very similar in properties, there's no evidence that Blaze can go super using the Chaos Emeralds, and conversely, Sonic cannot use the Soul Emeralds to access a burning form. So despite what some people have said to me in the comments, I think Sega's mandate and statement still holds true based off of Burning Blaze. Things definitely get a little bit more complicated when you consider the fact that Super Neo Metal Sonic has the ability to go super. This was first introduced in the Sonic IDW comics, which, if you weren't aware, are canon to the main series, so everything that happens in these comics is true to the actual story of Sonic. And Super Neo Metal Sonic is able to harness the power of the Master Emerald to go super. So you could argue that this does invalidate Sega's mandates, and they're kind of just making things up as they go, which, hey, is certainly a possibility. But also, I think there are some reasonable explanations for why it still falls under their criteria. So one of the big things that Neo Metal Sonic can do is he can copy the biodata of other characters. So you could argue that he copied the biodata of Sonic or Shadow in order to learn how to go super. Neo Metal Sonic aside, let's not forget that base Metal Sonic was made to replicate Sonic, who is a male hedgehog that can go super. If Eggman made a robotic copy made to mirror the same abilities, maybe he also programmed him with the abilities and properties properties to go super. Sonic Mania Adventures, Metal Sonic was able to use the Chaos Emeralds to get some type of burst of energy. I don't know if it's a full-blown super form, so maybe robots require the Master Emerald specifically to go super, but it seems like he has some type of reactive capabilities to the Chaos Emeralds, or, you know, obviously just emeralds in general. So is it far-fetched that the same rules that apply to Sonic would apply to his robotic copy? I don't think so. I think it's still okay, and I think it still falls under Sega's mandate. Now, the only thing that kind of throws all of this off is the presence of Super Mecha Sonic MK2, who goes super in Sonic 3 and Knuckles during Knuckles' campaign. He uses the Master Emerald to do so, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like a robotic copy of Sonic. Metal Sonic, of course, is not the only one. While he may be the best one, there still are others, so maybe they were programmed with similar properties. Mind you, he does appear after Sonic 2, so maybe Eggman witnessed Super Sonic, and then in Sonic 3 programmed him to go super. So I did say we would get to Trip the Sun Gazer, and this one is certainly very interesting, and I can see why a lot of people would say that this could invalidate Sega's mandate, as she does actually have a physical transformation into a dragon form, unlike Amy, unlike Tails, unlike Knuckles, unlike Mighty, unlike Ray. In terms of the canon, it seems like she does have an actual connection to the Chaos Emeralds. I guess the first place where we could push back is that Sega themselves do not call it a super form. They say Trip, when you get all 7 Chaos Emeralds, can now be dragon form. Compare that to the unlock message for the other characters. It says Sonic can now be Super Sonic. It says Tails now has superpowers. Knuckles now has superpowers. Amy now has superpowers. The only person that has a named super form is, of course, Super Sonic. So the first line of explanation I think that could be done on Sega's behalf is that it's not her super form, it's her dragon form. Instead of being an alteration of the base form like Super Sonic is, the dragon form for Trip is like a completely different transformation into a different creature altogether. So I guess you could say that. But there is some obscure lore about the North Star Islands, which is the place that Sonic Superstars takes place on, and the way it affects the Chaos Emeralds. So it's been said by the Sonic Lore Council that the abilities the Emeralds give you in this game are powers that are exclusive to the North Star Island. So for example, you can transform into like this water creature thing. So maybe it's not so far-fetched that Trip's transformation is due to the weird properties of the North Star Islands. And that's why she has a dragon form as opposed to a traditional super form. I think she does have some type of special connection to the Emeralds, but maybe the question is, can she transform into the dragon when she's not on the North Star Islands? That's something I would like to figure out. And that's why Sega doesn't classify it as a super form. It's a little weird, like you could definitely say that they're off with this and maybe inconsistent, but at the end of the day, I think that this is probably their explanation.